Sustainability, regionalization, stakeholders, visioning, community rights, biodiversity, core wilderness preserves, biosphere reserves, human settlements. Oh, this is the lovely, wonderful, swaddling language of the United Nations and their Agenda 21. So some of you may have come across this type of language before, ladies and gentlemen, when looking into Agenda 21 and the type of language that it uses to ingratiate itself in various local communities. But it is, if the soft and fuzzy and cuddly rhetoric belies a very nasty reality underneath. And tonight I'm hoping to go over this sustainable development Agenda 21 agenda that's unfolding and how it's operating, who's behind it, and what the guiding ideology behind it is. But unfortunately, our guest for this evening, Rosa Koire, is not yet online, so I haven't been able to get in touch with her. I am hoping we'll be able to get her up soon enough. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with Rosa Koire, you can find out more about her work at the Post-Sustainability Institute, and that's postsustainabilityinstitute.org. She's also the author of Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21, which is widely available online. Many of her talks and speeches, etc., are also available online for those of you out there who want to find out more. And tonight we're going to be talking about this unfolding agenda and what's behind it, who's behind it, where it's going, and how it's going to get us there. But just before we get into that, perhaps we should find out a little bit more about sustainability and how it's sold to the public. So on democratsagainstUNagenda21.com, we have this from Rosa Koire's website, but it's actually by Henry Lamb. And this is from an article that was first published on December 1st of 2005. It says, quote, "As the sustainable development movement continues to gain momentum, it is worthwhile to step back and take a long look at the big picture, painted with a broad brush to reveal what the United States might look like as the movement's vision is more fully implemented over the next 50 years or so. The picture painted here is based on official documents published by several government agencies and non-government organizations during the last decade. These documents were rarely reported in the news, and average working people have no idea what sustainable development really means, and even less knowledge of what is in store for the future. If the vision of sustainable development continues to unfold as it has in the last decade, life in the United States will be quite different in the future. Half the land area of the entire country will be designated wilderness area, where only wildlife managers and researchers will be allowed. These areas will be interconnected by corridors of wilderness to allow migration of wildlife without interference by human activity. Wolves will be as plentiful in Virginia and Pennsylvania as they are now in Idaho and Montana. Panthers and alligators will roam freely from the Everglades to the Okefenokee, excuse my pronunciation, and beyond. Surrounding these wilderness areas and corridors, designated buffer zones will be managed for conservation objectives. The primary objective is restoration and rehabilitation. Rehabilitation involves the repair of damaged ecosystems, while restoration usually involves the reconstruction of natural or semi-natural ecosystems. As areas are restored and rehabilitated, they are added to the wilderness designation, and the buffer zone is extended outward. Buffer zones are surrounded by what is called zones of cooperation. This is where people live in sustainable communities. Sustainable communities are defined by strict urban growth boundaries. Land outside the growth boundaries will be managed by government agencies which grant permits for activities deemed to be essential and sustainable. That's right, friends. The vision of the future under Agenda 21 is a vision of a complete totalitarian society, micromanaged down to the absolutely smallest level by bureaucrats in the United Nations who have absolutely no accountability to you, me, or anyone else. And this is the nightmare vision of a society that's coming on to us under the guise of sustainability and all of this fun, fluffy, cuddly rhetoric.
Before us today. Mr. Speaker, I understand we're under martial law as declared by the Speaker last night.
Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, And a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no.
They say, trust us. Trust us, the people who brought us Katrina, to be competent in face of a disaster. Trust us, the people who brought us warrantless wiretapping and other excesses eroding our civil liberties. Trust us. Maybe the plan just really doesn't exist, and that's why they won't show it to us.
If you live in the heartland of America, you have to listen up. While the nation was distracted with the Anthony Weiner drama, President Obama signed an executive order that will seize greater power over food, fiber, and energy in our vast countryside areas. Why would Homeland Security be involved in exerting power and influence over the heartland? The aims of the White House Rural Development Plan sound eerily similar to a UN plan called Agenda 21, where a central planning agency would be responsible for oversight into all areas of our lives, a one world order. Sound familiar?
You say that would mean that we the people, the United States Constitution, would be circumvented at the altar of this one world what?
One world government, one world secondary. Our sovereignty would be subject to the dictates of the World Trade Organization, the World Bank.
This is AIG, Goldman, and you know what? The Bavarian Illuminati, the Trilateral Commission, Goldman Sachs, and the Queen of England are not all bad. Goldman can be the first to rally hard enough to fix itself. I call it a virtuous circle that makes the stock even more attractive. Oh, by the way, I am part, just like when I always play with an open hand, I am part of the powerful cabal of ex-Goldman associates that controls the world.
We economic hitmen have created the world's first truly global empire. And it's the first empire in history that's been created primarily without the military. Out of the ruins, something new will take seed. I want to believe that we can not collapse, but change. And the whole world can change, and the whole world economy. And I think we have a really good shot at doing that.
I really think he's going over there to try to create a one world order. God forbid this even that this happens in our country. Our country, as we know it now, will no longer exist. The thing that worries me the most is this health care bill, and why I'm scared about it. It's not about the health care. It's about the provisions that are in that bill. One is that if this thing passes, the government will have the right to come into our home and regulate how we raise our children.
What's happening is we are now in a state of martial law and war globally. NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, that Obama has called for and signed, stipulates that even American citizens can now be targeted by the military, picked up, and imprisoned indefinitely without civilian trial, thus throwing out our due process, our habeas corpus clauses. So we are now in the state of martial law. Everything is now creating conditions for a total war state. I mean, McCain called for the whole of America becoming part of the so-called battlefield. America is now a battlefield. The whole earth is a battlefield.
When law enforcement roam the streets, leveling guns at the windows of homes.
Yeah, you sent us this picture.
That's a problem.
Shows a guy in the gun turret pointing right at somebody's window.
We had lots of examples of that in New Orleans when they brought in the National Guard.
This is after Hurricane Katrina. And Mayor Nagin said, well, I've declared martial law.
Because he can't.
He can't. That has to be the Congress or the president. Let's explain what martial law means.
Well, martial law just is very simple. It means you're under the responsibility of the military.
They declare martial law or whatever state of emergency.
The police already have special powers. There are only two ways to do things in life, voluntarily or forced. Only government police officers, for example, have the right to use force on others. They can detain us, jail us, shoot us if they think it's necessary. That's why it's important that we have this, the Constitution. But the police don't always respect this. Like most people, they're happy to acquire more power and money.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? How has the United States changed from a humble, peaceful republic into a police state? Have you ever noticed that the government always claims that when it does these things, it does so in the name of safety? When is the last time you heard the government give, as a basis for its behavior, personal freedom?
The slow transformation into a military police state. We now have police dressed like Army Special Forces, driving armored tanks and holding assault rifles, the sight of which alone is enough to terrify innocent people into submission. The militarization of local police departments is not only changing the way peaceful communities once looked, it's also bringing the battle mentality to our neighborhoods. We may not see police as a threat to us now. But when peace officers are geared up like soldiers, they'll eventually act like they're going to war.
Who could want a government that punishes people for speech, that lets its own agents write their own search warrants, that fights wars just to keep the military-industrial complex busy, that debases all you own by printing worthless money and putting it into the stream of commerce, that gives away more than half the tax dollars it collects, and that, despite express provisions in the Constitution to the contrary, permits the president to lock up whoever he wants and to throw away the key. Whether you believe that we are the highest order of natural selection, or whether you believe, as I do, that we were created by God in his image and likeness, you know in your heart that these natural yearnings, as St. Thomas Aquinas and Thomas Jefferson called them, are our natural rights, are a part of our humanity, and cannot long be denied us. And yet, they have been denied. America, the greatest losses to our freedom have come not from someone attacking us, but from the government ignoring the Constitution and the majority letting them get away with it. And we should make the government afraid of us. Afraid of us.
Rosa Koire, author of Behind the Green Mask, and talking about the UN Agenda 21 and what is really behind it. Rosa Koire, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, James.
Well, perhaps we can start off for the benefit of the listeners out there who are encountering you for the first time or are unfamiliar with your work. Let's just hear a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in researching UN Agenda 21.
Well, I'm a professional appraiser, a commercial appraiser. I was a district branch chief for the California Department of Transportation for about 30 years and an expert witness testifying in land use and land value. And about 10 or so years ago, I found that it was pretty difficult to determine what property was worth because people were being restricted in what they could do with their property. And around that same time, I was elected to an oversight committee on a redevelopment project, a huge project, and I researched it and found that it was fraudulent. So we sued to stop that, and while doing the research to find out what was behind that redevelopment project, I found United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development.
Well, let's talk about your book and how that came together and the type of research that you've done over the preceding years into this agenda.
The book is, basically I wrote the book because I am traveling all over the United States and I just simply wasn't able to go everywhere. And I had the information and was able to put it together in a way that's very clear and understandable, and it's a quick, short read. And in that way, I was able to reach a lot more people because United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development is a global plan, but it's implemented locally. So this is really important because it doesn't come called Agenda 21, so you have to know what it looks like in your town to be able to recognize it.
Well, that's right. In fact, every time we have someone on to talk about Agenda 21, it's everyone has their own way of summing up what that is and how it's unfolding. So what's your take on what is United Nations Agenda 21?
Agenda 21 is the action plan. It's the blueprint to inventory and control all land, all water, all plants, all minerals, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all information, all energy, all education, and all human beings in the world. That's it. It's totally comprehensive.
It's so comprehensive. It goes into so many different aspects of everyone's everyday life that it's staggering to think that so few people actually have even heard of this Agenda 21, let alone know what it is. How can it function so that it maintains that level of secrecy while being completely out in the open?
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a stealth plan and it's operating in plain sight. And that is because it's called by so many different names. You'll see it in your town as a regional plan, generally as One Bay Area or Vision 2025 or Our Future 2050, something like that. Because what it is, the plan was signed onto. It was an actual United Nations agreement signed onto in 1992 by our president, George H.W. Bush, along with 178 other national leaders. And you're going to hear that it's an old, dusty plan, that it's not binding, that it has no impact on you. That's a lie. the truth is that it was brought back to the United States through the President's Council on Sustainable Development back in 1993, and all federal agencies changed their policies to conform with United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development.
That's right. Well, let's go back to some of the beginnings of this, because as you indicate, it was first signed as an agreement in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, but it has its roots in policies that go back at least to the 1970s. Let's talk a little bit about the history of these ideas of sustainable development and how they came together.
Yeah, it's great. You know, it's the kind of thing that you think to yourself, well, how could I be against sustainability? Just sounds so great. I mean, who wants to be unsustainable? And of course, that term, sustainable development, is a term that comes right out of the United Nations, 1987, the Brundtland Commission, World Commission on Environment and Development, and they wrote a book called Our Common Future. And in that, the term sustainable development was first coined, formally given a definition, and that is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Sounds great, right? But this has its roots in prior meetings of the United Nations in 1972 and then again in 1976. The Habitat 1 and 2 determined that land, privately owned land, is actually a threat to the equity, social equity of people on the planet. And this is a very vital part of the United Nations Agenda 21 because it actually is an attack on private property ownership. And also, you have to remember that we ourselves are our own most important private property. And this plan actually enables domestic surveillance, the National Defense Authorization Act, drones, and control of all of our activities on the planet.
I think there must be a variety of reasons for why this is being pushed by the people that it is, but I guess if there is a guiding ideology behind this, I've heard it cited before that communitarianism might be that ideology that provides the framework for this agenda. So what is communitarianism and how does that play into this agenda?
Communitarianism says that it's an ideology, it's a political and social philosophy, and it says that the rights of the individual need to be balanced with the rights of the community. And, if you're an American or in many free countries, the individual's rights are guaranteed. Our rights are guaranteed to us by our Constitution, cannot be taken away by any government, and we're born with them, right? But if you balance the rights of the individual with the rights of the community, those community rights are not delineated. They can change at any time. They are, depending on who the ruler or government is, and they always have greater weight than the weight of the individual. That means that you're always going to see that the individual's rights are a threat to the community, and in this case, we're talking about the global community.
Well, that's right, and it does kind of flip the idea of rights on its head. The rights that are enshrined, for example, in the Bill of Rights, or even the ones that they pay lip service to in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are all guarantees of individual rights and liberties. But somehow now we're expected to take on board the idea that there are communal rights that somehow supersede those of the individual. So where does this idea come from, and who are the types of people who are pushing this?
Well, this is an ideology that, you can go back to the Fabian socialists in the 1800s, if you want to, if you're interested in doing, sort of a theoretical search on the development of this plan. But it goes back further. Obviously, it goes back to any ideology that instates a dictatorship or an oligarchy. But in our case, because we are a free nation, it needs to have the trappings of a socially acceptable philosophy, and that's where communitarianism comes in, because what we're talking about here is the 3 E's: environment, economy, and equity, social equity. That's, when you see those 3 circles, the image of United Nations Agenda 21, it looks like a Venn diagram, and where economy, ecology, and social equity come together, that's, sustainable development, that's sustainable. But equity is a very vital part of this, because this is the illusion, is that you're going to have, a balanced world where everyone is going to, no one's going to have too much. Everyone, the super wealthy 1% is going to go away. And, the poor will all have plenty of food and water and everything else that they need. But the concept, that's sort of the overarching concept. That's the green mask, as I call it. That's one of the reasons I call my book Behind the Green Mask. Because, in fact, what this does is it enables total takeover of our resources, both natural and human, by those who want to totally control the earth.
Well, let's talk about some of those people who want to totally control the earth, and some of the people who have been instrumental in this agenda. Of course, people like Maurice Strong were instrumental in the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. Who are some of the figures who have been spearheading this Agenda 21 agenda?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, we're going to have the ultra-wealthy and those who, through hereditary ownership of property or a huge amount of the world, the ruling royalty classes, particularly the English, who own a huge amount of the world. The Catholic Church owns a tremendous amount of the world, the Vatican. But, I think, and obviously we're talking about Maurice Strong. He's extremely wealthy. He owns one of the largest aquifers in the North American continent underneath the Baca, which is below the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in Colorado. What we're, obviously we're seeing these are enormously wealthy people who are not satisfied with just personal wealth. They want to control all assets and all natural resources. So we're talking about land, we're talking about oil and gas, timber, water is a very vital part of this, controlling all water and owning all of those resources. So things that are now owned in the, by your government, that are controlled by your local government, are going to be privatized. And this is what, people don't recognize this when they talk about, for instance, how certain governments or certain individuals have their best interests and are talking about, like, for instance, Bill Gates, wanting to vaccinate, the poor of the world.
Exactly.
General Dempsey, you in one of your criteria for determining what we might do militarily, you say you have to ask the question whether the action is worth the cost and is consistent with law. What law does the United States military look to?
Yeah, if I could, since I'd like to address both because they are related. So cost, resources, risk incurred elsewhere by the use of force one other place. So, it's a zero-sum game. We take them from someplace else, we use them for how long, and that's the kind of issue of cost. Is it? And, of course, in blood and treasure. The issue of legal basis is important, though. We act with the authorized use of military force either at the consent of a government, so we're invited in, or out of national self-defense, and it's there's a very clear criteria for that. And then the last one is with some kind of international legal basis, an UNSCR.
Wait a minute. Let's talk about an international legal basis. You answer under the Constitution to the United States government, do you not? And you don't need any international support before you would carry out a military operation authorized by the commander-in-chief.
No, of course not. That's the second one I mentioned.
I just want to know that because there's a lot of references in here to international matters before we make a decision. And I want to be sure that the United States military understands, and I know you do, that we're not dependent on a NATO resolution or UN resolution to execute policies consistent with the national security of the United States. Now, Secretary Pinella, you, in your talk, in your remarks, you talk about first, we're working to increase diplomatic isolation and encouraging other countries to join the European Union and Arab League in imposing sanctions. And then you note that China and Russia have repeatedly blocked the UN Security Council from taking action. Are you saying, and is the President taking the position, he would not act if it was in our interest to do so if the UN Security Council did not agree?
When it comes to the kind of military action where we want to build a coalition and work with our international partners, then obviously we would like to have some kind of legal basis on which to do it, as we did in Libya.
Now, some sort of legal basis. We worried about international legal basis, but nobody worried about the fundamental constitutional legal basis that this Congress has over war. We were not asked, stunningly, in direct violation of the War Powers Act, whether or not you believe it's constitution. It certainly didn't comply with it. We spent our time worrying about the UN, the Arab League, NATO, and too little time, in my opinion, worrying about the elected representatives of the United States. Do you think that you can act without Congress to initiate a no-fly zone in Syria without congressional approval?
You know, again, our goal would be to seek international permission, and we would come to the Congress and inform you and determine how best to approach this, whether or not we would want to get permission from the Congress. I think those are issues we would have to discuss as we decide what to do here.
Well, I'm almost breathless about that, because what I heard you say is we're going to seek international approval, and then we'll come and tell the Congress what we might do, and we might seek congressional approval.
No, well,
I want to just say to you, that's a big dish. Wouldn't you agree? You've served in the Congress.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree that that's would be pretty breathtaking to the average American? So would you like to clarify that?
But I've also served with Republican presidents and Democratic presidents who has always reserved the right to defend this country if necessary.
But before we do this, you would seek permission of the international authorities.
If we're working with an international coalition and we're working with NATO, we would want to be able to get appropriate permissions in order to be able to do that. That's something that, you know, all of these countries would want to have some kind of legal basis on which to act.
What legal basis are you looking for? What entity?
Well, obviously, if NATO made the decision to go in, that would be one. If we developed an international coalition beyond NATO, then obviously some kind of UN security resolution would be the basis for that.
Coalition of. So you're saying NATO would give you a legal basis, and an ad hoc coalition of nations would provide a legal basis?
If we were able to put together a coalition and were able to move together, then obviously we would seek whatever legal basis we would need in order to make that justified. I mean, you know, we can't just pull them all together in a combat operation without getting the legal basis on which to act.
Well, who are you asking for the legal basis from?
If it's obviously, if the UN passed a security resolution as it did in Libya, we would do that. If NATO came together as we did in Bosnia, we would rely on that. So, you know, we have options here if we want to build the kind of international approach to dealing with the situation.
Well, I'm for all for having an international support, but I'm really baffled by the idea that somehow an international assembly provides a legal basis for the United States military to be deployed in combat. I don't believe it's close to being correct. They can provide no legal authority. The only legal authority that's required to deploy the United States military is the Congress and the President and the law and the Constitution.
Let me just for the record be clear again, Senator, so there's no misunderstanding. When it comes to the national defense of this country, the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to act to defend this country, and we will. If it comes to an operation where we're trying to build a coalition of nations to work together to go in and operate as we did in Libya or Bosnia, for that matter Afghanistan. We want to do it with permissions either by NATO or by the international community.
Talking about UN Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Agenda that is unfortunately unfolding before our very eyes. About the process that we were talking about before the break, we were talking about how people are distracted from this agenda by not participating in local politics, and that is exactly how this agenda is moving forward. So let's talk about some of the solutions to what we see coming forth for the people who are aware of what's happening. What is it that they can be doing at their local level to help combat this?
Well, I think it's really important to understand how you're being manipulated locally, so that when you are, when you see it, you understand that it's happening. And I spend quite a bit of time in my book talking about how to anti-Delphi government meetings. The Delphi method is, the Delphi technique was developed by the Rand Corporation in post-World War II in the Cold War. And it is being used to, the reason it was developed was to bring groups of people to a predetermined outcome while giving them the idea, the illusion that they actually had a say and that they had that they were actually crafting the outcome themselves. So this is actually a management organizational technique that's being used right now in every large government meeting where you are invited to come and give your opinion on a plan. Usually these are the regional plans, or they're a general plan or a master plan for your local town. And of course, when you show up there and, they have the screen show, and they have, you color with your crayon and put your little gold stars on the map and show where you want to see smart growth, high density development. Really, the plan is all designed before you walk in the room. In fact, the plan, of course, as I said, it's the same plan all across the world. So you need to know how to anti-Delphi, because what they're doing there is they're doing two things. They're propagandizing you, and they're also using social pressure, which is part of communitarianism, to make it so that you, even if you don't agree with the plan, you will be too... your nerves won't be able to handle standing up and saying that you don't agree with it, because there's all that social pressure to keep you quiet, and so everyone goes along with it. So what we talk about, what I talk about in the book, and what we have, we've got videos online to show you what happens when we go in anti-Delphi meetings. You really need to make it clear that those plans are not your plan, that you are being manipulated, and you have to take these meetings down correctly, or you're just going to end up looking like, someone who's a rabble-rouser who's trying to, keep all these good people from being able to express this wonderful plan to all your, local citizenry. So it's very important to understand that this is a mind control technique, and there's almost a cult element to this plan in its entirety. And they use professional organizations like the American Planning Association, like the National Association of Counties, like the League of Cities, the League of Women Voters, the many, many non-governmental organizations are part of this plan because they are empowered by United Nations Agenda 21.
Exactly right. Well, it paints a bleak picture, but at least there is the hope that people can start to get involved. On that note, we have Lark in Texas back on the line. Lark, thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Well, thank you, James. I apologize you weren't able to hear me before. I can't imagine where the technical snafu arose. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, very good. Rosa, I'm so glad you said mind control. It's such a pivotal term of art that needs to be understood, because you mentioned earlier, you too, James, about how it is that this is being this agenda is being introduced to the through the general population by empowering some and painting it as a kind of a universal buy-in. And so what I wanted to bring to your attention, invite your comment, is I've been doing some research recently into historical roots and development of altruism. We're talking about at the university academia level, and its tie-in with what is known as the Tikkun Olam, which is a Jewish concept which means repair of the world. And this is where I have discovered the language and how it's being manipulated so that people are led to believe that this is such a wonderful thing and how they're deceived. Because an example of that is tonight I was doing some research on something called soiltrust.com. Soiltrust.com. And it sounds like a wonderful thing. And I looked at the people behind its management, the board of directors, how these things are funded. A similar program is something called community-supported agriculture.
Right.
But within all segments of society, whether it's industry or law or academia, medicine, science, I'm seeing how this language is manipulated, and the only people that are able to get funding or anything that they want to do have to buy into this kind of coded language in order to receive support.
Right.
Any
it's
comments?
like it's displaying the gang symbols in order to get the gang funding. I think that must be part of it. Well, Rosa, your thoughts on that?
Well, Tikkun Olam is it's about doing for the world. What you're talking about with altruism is something that actually is wrongly associated with Christianity. It's the theory by Auguste Comte that says that, in fact, you're supposed to do for others. And so what this ends up looking like, really, is communism. And I'm not, now, we're not talking about communism here. We're talking about communitarianism, and this is something different. But what we're looking at is with social equity, that it's, they're using guilt. And they're saying that basically that those of us in the developed world have too much. This is what sustainable development is. What is considered to be unsustainable is single-family residences, private vehicles, meat eating, appliances, air conditioning. And so this is everything that you're accustomed to living with in the developed world and what you wish to have, if you're aspiring to the middle class, at least. This is considered to be a source of guilt. And so what we're dealing with here is a number of different philosophies that come together that all justify basically taking away your right to be, your livelihood and your right to be independent. And to give you the sense that you need to redefine progress and redefine the way that you relate to the world, because you need to be ashamed that you are associated with anything that would exploit the natural resources. You see, this concept says that the resources of the world are finite. So there's no such thing as renewable resources like water, or, and so you then have to be charged the real cost of water. And this is another way. We are being impoverished by the implementation of this plan.
All right, Lark, thank you for that call. Let's move along. We also have William in Oregon on the line. So, William, thank you for your call tonight. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you. I was just following Rosa's comments on this, and very articulate and well-spoken. In looking at frameworks, we deal with the frameworks pertaining to detection, analysis, and then what comes out of this. The capstone doctrine, as it's known, is a UN doctrine. It also has a longer history. And what is coming out of that is international innovative law, consensus reality, and down into the abolition of the individual property rights replaced by a collective. Mm-hmm. The doctrine that is most articulated that we have tracked and spent many years in deep field audits on is collaborative governance. Collaborative governance is what Rosa is talking about in terms of doctrine. The theories and the applications may be abstracted as communitarian law and so forth, but the actual doctrine specifying the Delphi technique, which is basically on the same page, go along with or else, sets up isolation, alienation, and termination of any critical or dissenting opinion. Mm-hmm. The solutions that we've looked at that go in that that actually go into this, obviously, are detection. The Achilles heels of the collaborative movement, and it is called the collaborative movement, is the non-disclosure aspect of their contracting processes. In other words, you have a lot of so-called green EnviroPACs, political action committees, that are safeguarded by a contracting secrecy arrangement. They call it spirit of confidentiality. So we've tracked this to the extent of a 706-page report about all of the particulars and how this fits in and integrates to the larger plans, not conspiracy, actual plans of the Capstone Doctrine. There's no question that there is a religious grounding in these documents, whether it's a left certification scheme for green. They believe in the precautionary principle, which means you don't have any data to make a decision from.
All right, let's get Rosa's comments on this. So your take on this collaborative governance idea, Rosa.
Because I really appreciate hers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. It was excellent. Let me just, there's a lot there, and of course, I do actually go into all of this in my book. One thing, I was in an international conference this past June, and one of the other speakers was President Václav Klaus of the Czech Republic. And what he said was that, of course, the Czech Republic, the Czechs, did everything that they could to get out from under the Soviet Union. They emerged free and, against his wishes, joined the EU, the European Union. And he said, of course, now they're under the control of Brussels. And what we're talking about, of course, you have, non-governmental organizations are vital to this plan, because they are actually, this is the way the circle goes around, is that they influence government, government funds them, they are also funded and influenced by corporations, and they make contractual agreements, so they have interwoven systems with local governments. And ultimately what we're talking about is empowering local government and then moving that empowerment into a regional cycle. So this is I'd like to get into ICLEI, International Council on Local Environmental